Hey guys, in this video we're going to do a game recap from Norway Chess 2021, Magnus Carlsen against Alireza Firouzja. So the game starts out e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and we go into a Roy Lopez. Roy Lopez is very common at the top level. Magnus has played this quite a bit from the white side. So we kind of follow standard theory for a while. And if you look here at the Chess database, this is based on master games. You can see we're still following 1,200 games here. White's winning 33%, black is winning 16%. Alright, so at this point, one thing to keep in mind with the Roy Lopez, oftentimes this e-pawn looks like it's free for black to capture, but if black captures here, white can play pawn to d4, and after e takes, c takes, even though white is still down a pawn, this is very dangerous for black. There's threats of rook e1 coming on the open file. If bishop e7 is played, white's going to play d5 and queen d4, and we can see like this knight's attacked, g7's attacked, pawn to d6 could be thrown in, rook e1 ideas. This is a very good position for white. So black is not able to capture the pawn here. Knight takes e4. So you might be wondering, well, why didn't black take that pawn? And in a couple moves here, we'll see black has another opportunity to take the pawn. Oh, I should also mention, let's look at the engine here. If black takes this pawn, knight takes a5, there's this cool move, rook takes e5, and if bishop takes back, d takes e. And this is a good endgame for white. So white gets a lot of play against the black king, and the engine's showing an advantage. So after bishop to a7, h3, there's still no knight takes e4 because now with this d pawn up, there's bishop to d5, forking both knights. So bishop to b7 was played, bishop e3, and now we finally see knight takes e4, but after some trades unfold, Magnus is able to win the pawn back. So we see take, take, queen trade, trade bishops, and now knight takes e5. So I'm going through this opening pretty quickly, but I really want to get to the endgame because that's kind of the most important part about this game, is showing this endgame technique that Magnus has. So bishop to d5, bishop to c2. This is kind of the start of it. Magnus is playing for this imbalance, light square bishop against light square bishop, because if you look at Magnus's pawns, they're all on dark squares, and Alireza has two pawns on light squares. So if you just have two bishops on the same color complex, you want your pawns to be on the opposite color of those bishops, and you want your opponent's pawns to be on the same color as their bishop. So after knight to c6, to me this looks like Alireza's just playing for a draw. Alireza just wants to trade everything down, play for the draw. Takes, takes. Rook a to d1, and Magnus here is saying, okay, I'm fine swapping the rooks off too. Let's just focus on this imbalance. Light bishop against light bishop. And I don't know if Alireza saw this coming or really appreciated how difficult this endgame could be against Magnus. But here if you look at the engine, it's saying like somewhere between half a pawn, 3/4 of a pawn for white. So there's an advantage, but it's not a huge advantage. I think it's the practical nature of the position and how difficult it is to play with someone like Magnus's endgame strength coming against you. It's really hard not to crack when you're playing the black pieces here. And one cool thing about this game, this is Carlsen Firouzja in a classical game. If you think about which player is going to overtake Carlsen as world champion someday, I don't think it's going to be a player that's from Magnus's generation. And what I mean by that is if you look at the past world championship matches, and I have an article here to highlight this, in the past 17 world championship matches, only 3 times the challenger won the crown. And they were all at least 12 years younger than the champion. So champions have won 14 of the last 17, and the 3 times that the challenger won, they were 12 years younger than the champion or more. That's why I think this game is so important, because A lot of the top players right now are very close to Magnus's age. Alireza is from a younger generation, so it's going to be someone like Alireza who becomes the next world champion, I think, and with the current standings, I think he has the most potential. So seeing them play in a classical game like this, with Magnus really pressing to outplay Alireza, I think is a very interesting game in terms of the future of classical chess. So now let's see what happens here. King to f8, f4. Look at this. This is not very complicated. All Magnus is doing is putting every pawn on dark squares. Okay, there again we see nice pawn chain on the dark squares. And look at this by Magnus, getting this pawn up on a dark square. So we see f4, g5. The only pawn not in a dark square is the h pawn. c5, and Magnus is going to ignore this pawn. If black takes, white takes back, and if black pushes, it's just another pawn on the light squares. So I think here Alireza is still going for the strategy of let's play for a draw. He feels that his position can't be any better here, but he also feels that it's maybe difficult for Magnus to force a win. So Alireza is trying to trade everything off. h4. So now we see Magnus has put every single pawn on a dark square. And there's this threat of h5, h6. So Alireza plays the move that might make the most sense, g6, trying to stop the h-pawn before it gets too far. But now look what's happened. Every pawn of Alireza's is sitting on a light square. Every pawn of Magnus's is on a dark square. This is where Magnus can start to press. So we see bishop to g4, bishop to e6. Now Magnus is not going to just take that bishop off. He plays the sneaky move h5, and if bishop takes bishop, there's h6, and no way to stop that pawn from queening. I don't know if Alireza saw this or not, but here he goes for trades, and that makes sense, right? So now it looks like it should be a little bit closer to a draw. King f5. And now look at this move by Magnus, very crafty. Maybe in hindsight, Alireza should have put the bishop here if he knew Magnus's plan, but even still, Magnus might have some tricks up his sleeve. But after king f5, Magnus plays bishop to f3, threatening bishop to b7, which would win the a6 pawn by force. So here Alireza plays bishop to c8. Now, if you compare these two bishops, the bishop on f3 can move anywhere along this diagonal, except b7, and it will always be threatening to come to b7 if this bishop moves. This bishop has no free moves that don't give up the b7 square. So Magnus is already starting to put Alireza in a bit of a zugzwang scenario where there's no good moves for Alireza. There's no good moves for that bishop currently that don't drop the pawn on a6. So now king d4, Magnus sacrifices the pawn, appreciating that this could give him winning chances. The king now is coming in this way to attack this pawn, and then Magnus wants to win both of these, sack the bishop for the f-pawn, and win the game with the a and b pawns. So even though this might still be a draw with best play, Magnus is really pressing to create some winning chances here, knowing that it's low risk for him. f5, king d6, f4. Now instead of king c7, which is what you might expect, Magnus takes the time to play a tricky move, king to e5. Now if you look at this position with Stockfish, the evals bounce around like crazy. Like sometimes it'll say white's up +4, sometimes it'll say +0, +0.7. But I saw someone ran Stockfish in the cloud up to depth like 48, and it appears that this should be a draw if Alireza plays bishop h3, bishop to d7, bishop g4, bishop f5. It looks like all of those moves should be a draw with best play, but even Stockfish isn't 100% sure. Some of those had an eval of 1.6. But Alireza was afraid of this bishop coming here and winning the a pawn, because then the b pawn is most likely going to drop too. and this a-pawn is very close to queening. So Alireza made the decision to move the king, trying to create an opposition scenario. So king takes f4, king f6. This is opposition. And Alireza was hoping that he could bring his king over here, help defend these pawns, and even if black loses a pawn here, maybe it creates a scenario where he could sacrifice his bishop for the last pawn and still force a draw. But now it's already a loss according to Stockfish. So king g6 was the losing move. King takes f4, king f6. So here Magnus plays bishop to d5, and look at this technique. So we know this bishop is stuck because bishop b7. The king now cannot come to f7 or e6 or e5 or f5, right? All these squares are guarded. There's only one open square for the king. And if king d7 is, king e7 is played here, there's king e5. And now there's no king d7 because bishop check is going to be a win. And I can just show that. This scenario, we're able to outflank the black king and win both pawns. So really amazing play by Magnus. He finds the win as soon as it's available, and he created all these chances to get to the winning position. So here Alireza plays bishop to d7, bishop to b7 by Magnus, picking up this first pawn. And he's not in a hurry to grab it. He was getting his king in position first. Now bishop takes a6. After bishop c6, king d4. Again, black doesn't want to allow this white king in, so he's got to wait with the bishop. But now bishop to b7, and this pawn is coming really fast. Bishop d7, bishop back to f3, bishop c8, bishop to e2, hitting this pawn, and now the black bishop has to make a decision which way to go. After bishop d7, look at this by Magnus, bishop to d3. So again, just creating these Zugzwang scenarios for black time after time, and after bishop c6, bishop to e4, and now this bishop has nowhere to go because this pawn is going to push. What a game by Magnus. So this was Norway Chess 2021. Magnus Carlsen got his first classical win of the event, I believe, in this game against up-and-comer Alireza Firouzja, who in my opinion is probably going to be the next world champion someday. I think it's most likely going to be Alireza. So I hope you guys enjoyed this Grandmaster game recap. Let me know if you want to see more of these videos. Like maybe we can pull some of the most interesting games from current events and show them on YouTube. I know there's a lot of other channels that do game recaps. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I want to make more videos that are the content that you want to see as the viewer. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.